take the risks that only you can take. Like, if you don't have a lot of resources, at least make the thing that no one else is making because of your unique chemistry of how you came to be and the things that you want to say, or your voice or your ideas. Like, make the thing that only you can make, because that's really the value that you provide. Once people start coming to you, it'll be because of that.
This episode is sponsored by Pelleplat, Sunbelt Rentals, and Craftsman Films.
We're so excited to be here today for our very first Off the Lot live episode. We have no idea what we're doing. Anything can happen. It's live. But look, we're so excited about the guests we have today. Now, Off the Lot, if you haven't heard it, is an indie film podcast about finding indie success as a filmmaker, making movies on your own terms. And that is exactly what our guests today, Zach Lipovsky and Stirling Bancroft, have done with Freaks and their highly anticipated sequel, Freaks Underground. So I'd like to welcome our co-director of Freaks, Zach Lipovsky, and DOP, Stirling Bancroft, to the stage. Let's give it up. Welcome. All right. Here we go. And let me just get into position here. And look, for those that have been living under a rock for the last little while, Zach Lipovsky and his co-director Adam Stein, who couldn't join us today, they are just coming off of directing the #1 movie in the world. All right, Final Destination, Bloodlines, and Stirling was a part of it. And look, they are going back to their roots together with Stirling to go back to Freaks and Freaks Underground. So we're so excited to talk to them about this. Let's dive in.
Yeah, so Adam and I had met on the Lot, which was 17 years ago now, as contestants against each other. And eventually we became best friends after that experience, went on to direct things separately. He went on to do comedy stuff. I was doing low-budget horror. We were just having that experience that you have where you're trying to get movies made the traditional way and they're not happening, and mostly not happening because getting all those ingredients together always feels essentially impossible. And we were both basically lost hope that doing the traditional thing was going to work. And we, at that time, this was 2015, Mark Duplass gave a speech at South by called The Cavalry's Not Coming, that I've talked about many times and I'm sure many people have watched, where he basically gives a point-by-point instruction manual on how to do things when the cavalry's not coming, and that the cavalry's never coming. And so this is actually your only choice. And the first thing on his list was just write a script where everything in the script is only things you already can get for free. That way, as soon as you're done writing the script, you're greenlit. And so we wrote down everything that we had, which was the two of us, his son, his house, a lot of the things were his camera, his family's restaurant, because we were going to shoot it in LA at the time. And we wrote a script just with those elements, intending for us to act in it as the people in Freaks. His kid was going to be the kid. And eventually, through the process of writing that script, we did start raising money, but all the money that we raised came with the idea that if that's all the money we ever got, that was fine. We knew we could make the movie for literally zero if we had to. So if we had 10 grand, now we could make it for 10. There was no amount of money we had to get to then greenlight it.
Well, and how were you raising the money even at that point?
So the first few people were just close friends and family that were like, oh, you're writing a script, I'll give you a little bit. And we're like, okay, great. Now we have a little bit. And each of the first kind of bits of cash were just from people that we knew through years of trying to make movies, and close friends or family members that had a little bit of extra cash that they knew they would never see again if they gave to us. And then through that process, we started getting to the point where we had enough money to realize maybe we didn't have to act in it. And then we started getting an actor, but that actor helped us get a little bit more. But if we didn't get that, it was fine. We could just do it with what we had. And ultimately, we ended up having about $1 million. We didn't have to act in it. We had a 2-time Oscar nominee play the role I was supposed to play, thank God. And the other thing we did was we put a date that we were going to shoot the movie no matter what, with whatever we had. And that was, I think, one of the other big things that actually made that movie get made was we're just like, whenever we would meet someone, and sometimes people would say, oh, you've already got some money, how about I give you a little bit more, but it comes with these requirements and you have to get this level of actor. And we just said, you can come on board the journey if you would like, but we're shooting on August 8th, no matter what, with whatever we have. And we'd love to have you, but we understand if that won't work for you. And that allowed us to just kind of move ahead. and on our own terms with people that were excited to do it in that way. And that allowed us to kind of make that first scrappy movie. And along the way, we Stirling and I had known each other a long time. We went to high school at the same time, different high schools, so we sort of knew of each other, and we went through the process of, we knew we were going to film that movie in an extremely bizarre way, and that we would need a collaborator that was as insane as we were on kind of how agile we were going to make that film. And Stirling, just from the moment we all kind of got to know each other, we knew that he had the insanity we were looking for, and we've been torturing him ever since.
Well, I was a very young cinematographer, and I didn't know how to use lights, so we didn't.
Yeah.
If I saw a window, I put a light outside behind it, and that was it. And we were like, look at this, it looks great. And I still don't know how to use lights, to be honest.
Well, and that's the thing with regards to those kind of low budgets. It's like writing to what you have, writing to what you can do, but also setting the production expectations up to match the movie you are going to be making. Obviously, if you have the entire facility here, you can make a different movie than the movie you're going to make if you make it with window and some practicals, and that's different. So when putting together that kind of a look, are you always keeping that in mind, and you're always building around the idea of we are limited, this is what we can do? And do you feel that infringed on the film at all, or did it actually make it better?
I think with the first Freaks film, and even our next one, we definitely went into the film with the idea that we wanted to be able to pan the cameras in 360. So we would always light from outside. We'd always make sure that we could do really ridiculous things. We could start on one close-up and then pan to someone else because we felt inspired or because we saw something developing in real time. And I think that process is something that Zach was really after.
We embraced that it shouldn't look perfect. That was sort of the intent with, like you said, of writing with what you have. The first Freaks, the idea was, what if it was a Sundance indie drama that had no money, but it was a superhero story with sort of more kind of darker themes, so that it should feel, and we loved Stirling's work, of like that completely natural, completely candid, because you hadn't really seen a superhero story told from that perspective of being almost a documentary. In that Sundance tone, knowing that that's all we would have the resources for, and accepting that there's going to be moments where it goes out of focus. There's going to be moments where someone's not lit. There's going to be moments where they don't have an eye light, and that's part of the aesthetic of making the world feel candid, because that's all we could, all the resources we had. And so we've been really dived into just the improvisational nature of letting the mistakes be on camera.
Yeah, there's such a realism to the film, and even from the opening shot, you're like, okay, well, like, what exactly are we watching? And I went in blind to the movie, and then by the time we're in the third act, and it just gets so much bigger and bigger, and I can't believe that you made this movie for $1 million. First of all, that's well,
the key thing was, so Mark Duplass says, write down all the things you can get for free and put that in the movie. One of the things
you had a military facility.
Well, I can get to that if you'd like on the military facility, but the VFX side is a skill that I have on a certain type of VFX, compositing, which is basically sort of bringing 2D elements together. And so we made sure that all the visual effects in the movie could theoretically be done by me on my laptop if I had to. Some of them other people did, but I did about 80% of the shots in that film on my 15-inch MacBook. And we only wrote things into the movie that we knew that I could do on my laptop. And so that, even though it does end up feeling really big, they were all things that we knew we could do within the resources that we had.
Wow, that's super inspiring, and that also reminds me of something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that had something like 800 visual effects shots, but it was done by the Daniels and like their 4 friends, essentially, on ultimately free software, After Effects and Blender. So is that what you did, After Effects?
Yep. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, it limits the type of visual effects you can do. Like, you can't do a big CG creature that needs, or big simulations or that type of stuff. It has to be things where you can basically photograph the elements and comp them together, which is why in that first film the type of superpowers are like freezing time and turning invisible, because like turning invisible is pretty cheap. You just freezing time is pretty cheap. Like, those are the type of visual effects that you could do.
But there's also a great element that you worked into the storytelling of it, because you had such a limited budget. You had to bring people to the set, right? So the telepathy and the powers that Chloe has. It was brilliant in terms of, well, let's bring Amanda Crew from the military facility into the attic. And that's such a smart way to keep your costs down, but add scope to the movie. And so that's why even as the movie progresses and you have more characters and the story's unfolding, it just felt like, it didn't feel like a $1 million movie. It just felt a $10 million movie. And the way you shot it was just, it was so economical and brilliant. Loved it.
Yeah, well, I think all those lower budget films, their actual budget is a lot more than you end up spending, because there's a lot of sweat equity. There's a lot of people getting paid less than they should be. There's a lot of people donating gear or volunteering or getting points or doing deferrals or those types of things where you're not spending the true value of what you're actually getting, and you're hoping to share that after the fact.
Aside from the cast, is there anything that $1 million got you that you wouldn't have gotten had you been down to $0?
Cast was probably the biggest thing. Other than that, I think the movie was better for having a crew and having food to pay the crew, because otherwise it literally would have been me holding the camera shooting Adam and Adam holding the camera shooting me. One thing we did on the first Freaks is basically pay everyone in the crew the same amount. So PAs were actually making more than they normally make, but everyone else generally was making less, and that was that. But it was still a lot of money to pay for 20 days, pay people to show up every day and feed them, and that type of stuff is what you have to do. And luckily we were able to keep most of the story in one location, so that's what helped it.
And just talking about the visual style and the limitations that you did face. So you talked about you wanted to be able to shoot 360. How many locations actually did you have? You had the house, the base. Let's get into that, and then how you designed the lighting and the visual style of the movie specifically with Freaks. But then also let's start to get into Freaks Underground and the differences between the $1 million movie and the larger film. I don't know what the number is, but
yeah, so the first film we shot for 4 weeks. The first 2 weeks were just in the house, mostly. I think the third week was a little bit. We had a few scenes outside, and like you said, the last few days we were out on the road. We went to the mine up on the way to Squamish and a few other places. But the vast majority of that movie takes place in one house, which is why we were able to kind of keep our resources down. And it was in Shaughnessy, which is like theoretically a place where you need huge permits and like huge permissions, but our crew was so small that we were able to keep the entire unit in the backyard of the house and just had one PA stand out front if any neighbors walked by and just give treats to the dogs and keep everyone happy. And we didn't have a permit to be there, but we were entirely on private property and not making noise. So theoretically we didn't need a permit. So it was that type of, I mean, the first crew on Freaks was so small that on the first day, I asked our AD to get the whole crew together so we could do a safety meeting. And he's like, this is the whole crew.
And Stirling, for you, what was your perspective on that and attacking this film at $1 million versus, where you guys ended up?
I think it's really interesting because we did so many things on the first film that felt like the best thing we could do at $1 million or whatever it was. And coming into Freaks Underground, when we were making a bigger movie with a little bit more money, we were always looking at how we could recapture that discomfort. We would walk past the most lavish circus, and then my assistant would sweatingly hand me a handheld camera, and I'd turn on one little practical and we go, okay, camera ready.
Well, Stirling was incredibly good at reminding us the aesthetic of the first film and to make sure that, and we did it for a lot of reasons for necessity, but keeping the feeling of the first film and how we shot it into the second film. You could talk about that.
It was really fun because I remember going to TIFF and seeing the film, looking at my shaky camera work and going, oh my God, what have I done? An audience has subjected to me unable to keep a camera still. I thought my career was over. But then I was scared making the second film. If I didn't do that and I didn't have that fear when I saw it again, would it be good? So I had a different kind of anxiety.
But we did things like on the second film, we just decided, I mean, he'll make fun of me for it, but that we weren't allowed to have any dollies, barely any, literally everything would be handheld no matter what all the way through the film. We did some Steadicam at the end of the day, but just the idea of not having a dolly on set just kind of was an ethos for me personally that I got made fun of a lot, but it was this isn't the type of world where that is kind of the aesthetic. Whereas for other films we've done, lots of dolly work, but it was just like those types of things of like, we could have never imagined to afford a dolly on the first film, or a dolly grip, or any of the things that come with it. So we don't have a dolly on this film either. So that just to keep that same ethos.
Yeah, I love that, the self-imposed limitations, just to try to maintain that, because it's so easy to go from, I don't know, like maybe Smile to Smile 2 that had so much more money and there's concerts and like, you know, arenas, and again, great movie, but being able to just put those limitations on yourself to try to capture that first, that's really, really interesting.
We had a dolly. We just kept it on the truck.
Ah, okay, great.
Sometimes they would like wheel it through the set, and I'd be like, "What's that doing there? Why is that?"
Is there that regret at the end where you're like half the equipment's on the truck you haven't even touched yet?
No, I think we used everything, even the dolly we used, but it was begrudgingly most of the time. And they're like, because when you're used to using a dolly, there are times like, I just need to be up on risers on a dolly, or like you use them in unconventional ways, or allows you to get a sideways shot or something. There's always some use for it that you don't think about, or if you don't have it, you really miss it. And it sat under a crane for a lot of it. But if you're working with Zach and Adam, and I'm not available, here's how they want the camera to move. It's got to be handheld, then it goes to Steadicam, and then it goes to a drone. If it's on a way that they can't control it through space at like 300 feet or however distance they want to cover, and it can't pan around like crazy and see everything, then it's too limiting.
I think that's, basically the camera, for these films in particular, for Freaks, had to be nimble and on its feet. So whatever tool it was on, it couldn't be a tool that, if we changed our mind, it was going to take 10 minutes to rejigger all the mechanics. It had to be, if the actors start going to the left, the camera has to be able to follow them and go down the hall, and like, so a drone can do that, you know, a Steadicam can do that, and a handheld camera can do that, of just like being able to follow the action. And the energy of the film should feel like that could happen at any minute.
Oh yeah, I was talking to Amanda Crew. This is so fun, because I was complaining about how it's hard, because like some days as cinematographers, you place an actor on a mark, you look at the light, and the no shadow falls there, and you go, yes, chiaroscuro. We are Rembrandt today. But we're not doing that on this film. We are Picasso being asked to draw something and scribbling on the back of a napkin and charging $300. Like, that's us. We're scribbling it.
Yeah, we ended up creating the second film. We definitely had this concept that Amanda helped coin of scribbling, because the whole film had that sort of aesthetic of like, let's just start running and like trying things and see where we end up, and suddenly there'd be these moments where everyone would go, oh wow, that's incredible, and that unplanned sort of urgency was very key to the Freaks ethos, which is different than something like Final Destination. It's the exact opposite. But for the Freaks world, that idea of sort of scribbling, the word ended up becoming really powerful, because when you think of a scribble, it removes judgment from your creation. It doesn't have to be good because you're just scribbling. And that type of lack of judgment really allowed us to kind of all together as a team remove ego and just start trying crazy things. And a lot of it wouldn't work, but that's the whole point, is like, this, for these types of films where there's no one looking over your shoulder, let's just take every risk we can think of and not be precious about the risks that we're taking.
That is, I love that term, scribbling. I'm going to steal that. And you're totally right. It just frees you up. I really like that.
How does the collaboration work between Adam and the two of you in terms of putting these kind of projects together? Just describe that process and how you guys come together in the first place.
I think it's pretty difficult, honestly, on the DP, because normally when there's one director, I think a lot of the initial brainstorming and sort of figuring something out would be between the director and the DP. But when they're, especially with Adam and I, who are co-directors, we both have a lot of the same inspirations and a lot of the same instincts, but we're constantly battling each other on what's the right approach, which is why we like doing it, because through that battle testing comes better work, comes better ideas, comes kind of trying things that weren't your initial first idea, because often your first idea is so easy to go with but isn't the best idea. And so because of that, there ends up being a massive amount of energy spent with Adam and I figuring things out, which would be the time in the schedule where you're figuring it out with your DP. So I think with the DPs we've worked with on different projects in Stirling, we recognize that then by the time we're bringing the DP into it, the ball is pretty far down the field. And that can be really difficult with the DP. We still then very much try and enlist creativity and honest feedback, and the DPs we work with them because they will tell us that isn't a good idea, or there's a different way of going, or they bring in their opinion, because we really value everyone's opinions. But I'm sure from your perspective it's quite difficult compared to a normal singular director situation.
I don't know. I've worked with a lot of pair directors recently, and it's always interesting and it's often better. And I think one of the hardest things is that I'll have a question. I'll be like, I don't get this. Like, and you'll have an answer, or I'll say, have you thought about that? And I'll realize that not only have you've thought about it ad nauseum, and that idea has been discussed to death and discounted. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but I'm catching up. And so it's hard with the knowledge that you're going to annoy your directors at some points, but you just have to, because it doesn't matter that they've got it. Now you've got to understand it too, so you've got to be there as well. But in that idea, I don't feel like it's less collaborative either, because I feel like because you're working with directors who are naturally very collaborative, there's a place where you get to a point where they're so used to collaborating, and now they're 2 rooms away in a tent, and you're right on the set with the cast, and they look at you, and you know what's in their mind, and you just go get it, and you help them to get it, and you make sure that they spank you if you overstep, but you get the movie in the can as a cinematographer, camera operator.
Yeah, we love working with Stirling especially as an operator, because he has that perspective of following his instinct as well in the moment, and turning the camera in a way that no one planned, just because in the moment it demands it. And we, especially for these Freaks films, love that type of aesthetic, and so we really try and fill him with all of the intentions, and then let him loose like a crazy animal with the actors and see what happens, and correct if necessary.
It would be more romantic if they stayed together.
The door would not stay afloat.
It's a movie, not a documentary.
Are you insane, bro? It was a real life tragedy.
Why are you so obsessed with tragedy?
Here's an idea. Why don't the two of you take your hot takes to Pelleplat? They're holding a contest for people like you. Plus, there's cash prizes.
Game on.
So, who won?
Straight away. We both won. Yeah, we found our people.
Perfect. By the way, what about the end of Inception?
Don't even.
No,
I know you're going to start,
no,
but I
You need to look at
Pelleplat Writing Challenges, where passionate minds meet. Join today at pelleplat.com.
Yeah, no, that sounds so interesting. And now let's talk about Freaks Underground a bit more specifically. What can you tell us about the film creatively, story-wise? Does it pick up with the mother and Chloe? And
yeah, it follows Chloe and her mom, who are the only surviving characters from the first film. Spoiler alert. Sort of 5 years later, Chloe's now 12. She started the first film with her father searching for her mother, and by the end of the film, she has her mother. And so the beginning of this Freaks Underground, she's had her mother now for like 5 years. She's a tween. The last thing she wants is a mother. She wants a friend. And in the world where everyone in the world is trying to kill you, or people like you because of who you are, finding a friend is quite difficult. And right at that age where your parents aren't your best friends anymore, and you're trying to find your identity amongst people your own age, but very difficult as a parent, where someone who's trying to protect her so desperately to not be killed by the fascist regime, it's also very difficult to raise a daughter who has the power of mind control, because then if she disagrees with you, what do you do about it? And so it kind of follows Chloe looking for a new friend, and then also really in a big way, the movie is about Amanda Cruz's character, who plays Mary, the mother, who is never really have been a mother because she wasn't really part of her daughter's life up until recently. And so her juggling with what does it mean to be a mother of a child who she wants to have a childhood, but if she gave her that childhood, she'd be at extreme risk. So it kind of follows both the mother's story and the daughter's story through that world.
Wow, and how did that come together? So you told us a little bit about how Freaks came together. You raised $1 million. You said you were going to do this no matter what. After that came out, and with you working on Final Destination, I'm assuming Hollywood just opened up the doors. You could walk into the bank, take as much money as you wanted, and make Freaks, right? That's how it worked?
It did not work that way, no. It was a very long journey. I can get into more detail if you want, but the basics of it was after the first Freaks, we were really excited about the film, and that gave us the opportunity to have a bunch of meetings in LA about all sorts of different projects. We started, at the time that was during the peak TV, sort of before the bubble burst of sort of streaming TV, where there was just, seemed like TV shows were being greenlit every day. So we wrote a version of Freaks as a pilot and kind of broke out what a first season would be. And it was quite an easy process of just, one of the ways that you can get a show going is to attach producers that have made lots of TV shows. And that first process of finding producers was actually surprisingly easy because we had the film to show. So basically we could show the movie all around to all these different TV producers and explain to them what the TV show was. And it was pretty easy to visualize what the show would be because the film kind of gave you a sense of the tone in the world, and here was a pilot script of what that first kind of kickoff would be, and it followed a similar storyline. So we were able to attach a producer. We then ended up going and pitching the TV show all around. We ended up selling it to a network, developing the pilot even more, and then
for a streaming network.
It was for TNT, so like a broadcast network.
Cable.
Cable, yeah. And then it eventually didn't get made. TV started to collapse. TNT stopped making television. All sorts of things happened. And then we were like, okay, well, I guess that went nowhere. We started working on other projects. And then about like 6 months later, after we were kind of licking our wounds, I was like, well, a pilot is like 60 pages and a feature is like 90 pages. So we really only have to write 30 pages. It's not that much, which of course is not at all, that makes absolutely no sense because a pilot is completely different than a movie. So then we spent what was supposed to be just writing 30 pages. We then spent a year turning that concept into a feature script, sent that around. The problem was we kind of had broken our main rule, which was that on the first Freaks, we only wrote a script that we knew we could make for $0, which is why the movie got made in the first place. Because we had written the other one as a pilot, it was a bigger scope, which we couldn't make on our own. And then when we transformed that into a feature, it still had a bigger scope that we just didn't have the ability to greenlight ourselves. And so then we had written this script that we couldn't make ourselves and sent it around and no one wanted to make it. And again, we were just like, okay, well, we broke that rule and spent all that time on that, and it was fun, but that's never going to get made. And then sort of months later, one of the producers that we had sent it to was like, hey, I read that, it's really good. Like, we should raise a bunch of money and make this. And we were like, yeah, sure, I guess. Like, that never really happens. And they're like, well, aren't you Canadian? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, can't you just get money out of Canada? And we're like, well, they're never going to make a sequel to a genre movie. Like, that isn't what...
It's a telefilm category now, actually,
That isn't what... Because this was an American producer. Like, that's not what telefilm does. But we ended up sort of scratching that, and eventually we talked to Elevation Pictures, and they were like, we love this. We would love to help you make this. And we were like, oh, okay. And it turned out the telefilm deadline was like 3 days later. So with Elevation, we put it in for the national level of telefilm, which is very few of those national films get made on the West Coast because you need a theatrical commitment, you need a certain amount of international sales, you need actors, all this stuff. But with Elevation's help, we put it in, and then to our shock, Marinez really loved it and thought that it had potential as a film and loved... Telefilm was always a bit jealous. They were never involved in the first Freaks. And so I think that there was sort of that energy. And so we ended up kind of getting Telefilm's piece, and then from there building up the financing in a fairly traditional pre-sale kind of situation. Still a small budget movie, but actual, like a normal budget for a film rather than a micro budget.
The films that you guys are making are... I mean, they're made to watch in a movie theater. I think it's fair enough to say that these are they're not made for television. What are you still wanting to make movies for theaters, and is that still a good place to go for all of the independent filmmakers out here who are, have dreams of having their films in theaters? Is this still a viable thing to be doing as filmmakers? It's
super high risk. So but I mean, theaters are doing really well this year, and in particular, genre movies are doing really well as far as something that people will go to the theater for. They seem to only be going to the theater for kids movies and genre movies. And so if you're in one of those spaces, that seems to be a good place for the theatrical experience. But it's a very high risk. It seems like right now, movies that do well happen to create, like Longlegs did the same thing, this feeling of an event that you have to be a part of, and if you're not part of the conversation, then you're a loser. And so then that creates this feeling of everyone has to go see this certain movie in the theater to be a part of the conversation, and that doesn't happen for every movie, so that's sort of the risk part of it. But the fact that Telefilm is still like really betting on theatrical experience is great for Canadians, and our film will be in theaters in Canada, but we don't know what it'll be in the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because what you're really talking about is supply and demand, and it's something that has come up on the podcast before as indie filmmakers about how to create that demand for your movie. Whether that's you're a YouTuber and you have your own built-in audience that you're now, you can now just email or make a video for and say, hey, my movie's coming to theaters. That's sort of, it's just another element of this industry that we're in right now. Final Destination obviously had incredible demand. The marketing around that was amazing to see too. I saw a video of like a logging truck on the highway with just the ad Final that terrified me.
Well, the funny thing about that was like during the actual shooting of the movie, we were desperately trying to get a logging truck, and for reasons of related to budget and stuff, we wanted 3 logging trucks and they couldn't get us, and then eventually we settled on we fought for 30 seconds of 1 logging truck at the end of one night, which we desperately fought for. But then the marketing team had a logging truck going on every road in North America. Everywhere we so desperately wanted one for the movie, and now they're all around the marketing budget, because the marketing budget is bigger than the budget of the film. But yeah, the marketing team did an incredible job with FD.
And Stirling, I just want to pivot back to Freaks Underground for a moment, because as far as the visual style goes and your cinematography, I mean, you guys were just showing me some stills which looked phenomenal. The movie's going to look amazing, obviously. But part of that was shooting on a volume as well, and I'd love to talk about, just to dive into what that was like on an indie film, being able to shoot in a volume. Maybe some of us have done that before, but what's that experience, and how did you use it specifically with what you showed me? Because I thought that was really, really cool and smart.
I was terrified. I mean, I've shot on the volume a fair amount by this point, but I think it was exciting to see how successful we could be with it. And we did a number of weird things. We shot really great plates, and then when I came to color grading those plates to put them on the screens, I color graded them at 4 different color temperatures, because I knew that I didn't know how to undo the look that I had in the camera to appear it on the wall, so I could reintroduce the look from my camera. So I was careful about how that was going to work, so I could get the color science right. And if you get the color science right, and you crank the wall really bright, then you can actually get some deeper shadows, which I think is the trick. I think it's dangerous to chase those lower exposures in the volume. I think you just got to go to the full maximum HDR of those screens, and then push everything down in camera to get to it. So it makes it hard. You can't really on set, we were lighting with very dim lights. We were lighting with candles a lot of the time. On the volume, everything got to be a much bigger shoot.
And we used it in a pretty unique way where we scheduled it as our last day. And basically, we were shooting with kids who were always running out of time and low budget, so we couldn't really go over many days. And we just kept having to drop shots as you do as you're going through, even critical, not just wouldn't it be fun to get shots, critical lines that need to be in the movie. And so when that would happen, we would get a plate of the wall behind the person that would have been what was behind them. And then at the end of the shoot, we just put those plates up on the volume, still had the actors, and kind of basically got all our inserts or close-ups that we had missed, being able to jump between all these different locations by just playing back what we had shot earlier in the shoot. So it wasn't virtual production, it wasn't Unreal, it wasn't virtual production as far as a live camera or anything. It was basically just rear projection getting inserts, but it allowed us to kind of plow through everything that we had dropped, which ended up cutting right into the movie really well.
I love that. I'm going to have to remember that for my indie and for everybody here. I mean, if you're running out of time, shoot a plate. Could you throw up a projector on a screen?
Yeah, I mean, you could also do it, theoretically, you could do it with blue screen too. It's a matter of just how do you set yourself up so that you can get what you need later.
Yeah, that's really great. And just a question about the production of Freaks Underground. How many days did you have? 20?
I think we had 25, 24, something like that. 27?
I think it was like 28.
28.
But we had a day 0, so I'm not sure if that's counted.
Yeah, somewhere.
The day 0.
Yeah, the first film was 4 weeks. I think this one was 5.5.
Okay, so generally, though, relatively the same size as Freaks, the first Freaks.
I think it was just, the film is a much bigger scope. The first film is in one house. This one is a road movie with way too many locations, like way too many cast members, way too many background. Like, we wrote it as if it was going to be a big TV show and then suddenly had to stuff it into a telefilm budget. And as greedy directors, didn't really turn down a lot of those knobs.
Yeah.
So we really, we kind of took the approach that Stirling was talking about of like, keep the scrappy crew nature, but what's in front of the camera still looks like a big thing. And we're still traveling to all these different locations. So a lot of the extra budget just went to the fact that like Stirling said, we had a pretty big circus of vehicles because we were a road movie traveling to all these different places around the Lower Mainland. Mm-hmm. And some of the scenes have 100 extras in them. Some of the scenes have, 50 people running around screaming as they're all getting shot. So it was like the scope of what was on the lens was quite large, but we were doing it with a tiny crew of people. Yeah.
We also had help from Sunbelt and Tug and the team. We had the world's best cameras and the most incredible lenses. So we shot with Alexa 35, which has this 6400 ES mode that basically sees in the dark. And we went into testing on it and we were like, oh, I love the grain on this. Can we add grain in camera? And Adam was like, no, it's distracting. We'll do it all in post. And I was like, but the 6400 ES mode had less grain than the grain I was going to add. So we just used it.
Having the Vantage ones and that kind of camera together allowed us to just shoot with incredible natural light. Like most of the sets, you would have to have your hand out in front of you because it was so dark that you couldn't see with your own eyes.
Wow.
But the camera would look amazing. And that allowed us to have the depth of field fall off incredibly shallow and allowed us to kind of have this really unique aesthetic that we were fine if the characters were talking and they were basically in silhouette and there's a candle in the background lighting an entire room. So like that type of feel a studio would never let you do. And I think our approach after Final Destination, which was an awesome experience, and we worked with Stirling on Final Destination as well, that's a much more controlled environment where you have a lot of people watching what you're doing. Our approach with Freaks Underground was just, let's take every single risk no one would ever let us do. And a lot of those things are going to blow up in our faces, but let's just go for it. And because this might be the only time we ever get that chance. And aesthetically, it creates a very unique look to the film.
Yeah, there isn't very much scribbling going on Final Destination, I imagine.
Not that they're aware of. Yeah, you have to hide that from them.
Yeah.
How does it feel then? I mean, you guys basically made Freaks Underground started getting into Freaks Underground right after Final Destination.
The day after.
The day after.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So what does the brain have to turn into?
It was
something
very it was probably easier for Stirling, but for us it was extremely difficult. It's hard to complain when you go from having one movie into the next movie because that's an incredibly fortunate thing to have. But basically what had happened is 2.5 years earlier, both Freaks Underground and Final Destination were greenlit on the same day, which everyone would think is like a dream scenario, but it actually was like the worst week of our lives because it was like this passion project you've been spending 7 years raising money from the ground up, convincing Telefilm to like give you all this money to make this thing that you control and can do anything you want with. That's your baby that you're going to make with all your friends. And a life-changing studio movie, and you have to pick one, is what it seemed like at the time. But luckily, through a huge amount of discussions and negotiations, we were able to delay Freaks to after Final Destination. But then because of the strikes, Final Destination got delayed, pushing into the point where Freaks, the window to make Freaks was extremely narrow, and we should have probably said we can't do it. But we said, oh yeah, we can fit it in, and literally we like finished the QC of Final Destination, the IMAX version of Final Destination, went to the airport and flew to Vancouver and did a concept meeting with the entire crew like the next day, and then filmed Freaks, finished at 2 a.m. on the volume, and started press 8 a.m. The next day for Final Destination. So it was like,
my
and
God.
the switching of your brain was the first week of prep. Like our bodies didn't even really know where we were. It was very difficult.
That's why you guys have two brains.
Yeah, it's easier when you have someone else you can rely on. But yeah, it was very tricky to do both, and that's where the scribbling came from as well. Is normally we would have done a huge amount of pre-prep for Freaks, and we essentially did none. So like we're starting our concept meeting, and Adam and I would have usually spent a week talking about every scene, defining the concept so that we could walk the crew through each scene and what we hope to execute. And we were having to do that live with the crew and just say, look, we haven't had time to prep this properly, but we trust all of you, and we're going to figure this all out together. And there's a lot of things we're going to tell you in this concept meeting that we don't know how to do or what the best way forward will be, or we might even be disagreeing in the meeting because we haven't had time to do that yet. But it allowed for bringing the crew into that collaboration.
And how many weeks of prep then was Freaks?
It was 5 weeks. Yep.
Okay.
Wow. Well, look, we're sort of nearing the end here, and what we usually like to do with our guests is ask each of you if you can give one piece of advice to filmmakers in the room, anybody listening that are starting out. What would that advice be?
I would say do no harm.
Do no harm.
Yeah, as a cinematographer, sometimes you put up a light and you're harming the image. So take that light or make it more useful. You put up a shot and you're doing something that's not great, or you're not listening to your directors and what they intend are. So just be kind.
Stirling has the patience of a god. I will tell you that. We certainly push our collaborators to the max with a lot of insanity, even on Final Destination. And the department heads we always come back to are the ones who constantly try and do the impossible, but when the impossible is actually impossible, they say, no, that is not physically possible, but here's what we can do instead, and do it with a smile on their face. And Stirling is one of those few people that can do that. So we beg to work with him whenever we can.
Zach is being a little generous. Sometimes I'm like, no, and they're like, what about this? I'm like, oh, yes. Yes, okay, yeah, we can do that.
I think for me, the advice, I think the biggest thing is watching that speech from Mark Duplass about the cavalry's not coming. It's very true and will always be true of like putting yourself in a position where you're the one who is in charge of what you're creating, and never trusting that the resources are going to come down from the sky to give you what you hope to do. You're always, no matter what stage of your career, and you're always trying to convince people to do things that they don't want you to do. And so he goes through in great detail how to kind of give yourself the tools to be in charge of that process. And I tell everybody to go watch that speech because it changed our lives and it's changed many other people. And I actually got to run into him. I was walking down King Street at TIFF a few years ago at like 8 p.m. and Mark walked past and I was like, oh my God, that's Mark Duplass. And I like ran over and said, hey, Mark. And he looked at me like, oh boy, he's like some fan. And I said, you know your speech, the cavalry's not coming? And he was kind of relaxed because at least he knew I was probably a filmmaker instead of someone who liked his acting or something. And just told him how much it meant to me and how much it changed my life, and how many films, even in Vancouver, there's many films that I wouldn't have existed unless they had seen that speech. And he was super thankful and went off to his dinner. And so I just encourage everyone to check that out.
Oh, I got one more.
Yeah, bring it on.
And I would advise never leave home and go to set without a B-glass for your camera and a polarizer.
B-glass and polarizer, all right? Write that down.
That'll be in the show notes. We'll have links to Tug on how to get those for your kit.
Provided by Sunbelt.
And Stirling is going to pay for your next polarizer and your B.
Polarizers are the absolute best. They make everything.
I think the overall message here, though, is that you can't wait for permission. You have to kind of take your career into your own hands. You have to take the risks that only you can take. Like if you don't have a lot of resources, at least make the thing that no one else is making, and you, because of your unique chemistry of how you came to be and the things that you want to say, or your voice or your ideas, like make the thing that only you can make, because that's really the value that you provide. Once people start coming to you, it'll be because of that. And so try and identify what makes your voice special,
and how you can do that for $0. And then every dollar you get after that, hold on to that. And that'll be the thing that serves you really well.
I love it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a blast. And thanks to all of you. Let's give it up for Zach and Stirling.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.